Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good to be with you on this Monday, May the 11th, as we come together on Facebook Live for another brief Bible study, continuing in the Gospel of John, and also some comments and announcements having to do with some things happening in the church as well. We had a wonderful, wonderful Mother's Day service, did we not, yesterday, led by our young people, our youth, and our young adults. Well put together by Kathy Claudius, and we're just so thankful for their participation in that service. Not participation, they did the whole thing. They led the service. So we are grateful for our young people and the leadership that they provide for the church. And I was just really touched by the honest way they described how they were feeling going through this time. And it was a really great opportunity for them to offer that to us as a gift, as part of the First Church family. So greatly grateful to them for their willingness to do that, and those who led in the liturgy and those who spoke. It was really a great Sunday service. Something traditionally we do here on Mother's Day at First Church, but this was a very different way of doing it because of having to record it and play it over Facebook and YouTube. But it was fantastic, and I watched it twice now, and probably will watch it again too. It was really great. This coming Sunday, we will have Pastor Hae Young returning to the quote-unquote pulpit. I'm not sure where she's going to record her message. Probably not in the pulpit itself, but in the pulpit, so to speak. So she'll be offering us a message, and the last I heard, she was going to be preaching on the theme of patience. Something very timely for this time as we continue through the quarantine and having to stay in our homes for the most part, going through this COVID-19 situation as we do. A couple of things coming up in the life of the church which are kind of exciting. We're trying to put together a day of prayer on May the 30th, and more information will be coming out about that. I believe that's going to be out through email and Facebook, and we might even do a phone call to get the word out. It's kind of like a constant 24 hours of prayer, I believe, is what Nancy was talking about, putting that together. But we'll see what that turns out to be. But the idea is you'll sign up for a time period in which to pray, and during that time period, we ask you to enter into moments of prayer, intentional time where you would do that. So that the idea is during that time period, everyone or someone will always be offering prayer for a specific theme. And I'm not sure what the theme is just yet, but as I said, more will be coming out about that shortly. So we're thinking that's May 30th, and you can sign up for a time slot, and we'll have more information on that coming in the future. Tomorrow is the first of weekly Stay Connected sessions that Pastor Hae Young will be offering, and I will be tuning in as well from time to time. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, that's going to happen. We're going to do this in short spurts, I guess you could say. So for those who are interested in doing it, they sent Pastor Hae Young an email, and Pastor Hae Young gave them the Zoom information. So this is not the only one, so if you couldn't get in on this one, don't worry about it. There'll be more coming down the road. So Stay Connected sessions start tomorrow, May 12th, at 2 o'clock, I believe is what Pastor Hae Young told me. So that's coming, and that'll be a weekly thing, and you'll have an opportunity to do that if you can't get in on these. Okay? So that's coming as well. So as we are continuing our march through the Gospel of John, and we're in the 11th chapter now, which is kind of cool, and see some folks have, oops, sorry about that, let me try this side. Some folks have logged on here, which I'll say quick hello. Marilyn, I just saw you at the church, and now you're watching. That's great. Good to see you, and thanks for picking up all those food pantry items and getting them to our ecumenical food pantries in town. Fantastic. Alan, good to see you. Hope you're staying safe and being well. And as one of our persons on the front lines, we're grateful for the work you do. Robin, good to see you too. And Robin, I believe you're now coordinating our scripture readers and doing some other stuff now for the church for our virtual worship, so that's fantastic. Colleague Amanda Cosnet has joined on. Good to see you tuning in, Amanda, and hope everything's well with you and your family during this time also. Cousin Carol is back on, and she looks like she's speaking Polish to me, I think. That's what I see there. You're much better at Polish than I am, Carol. That's tremendous. Anyway, let's continue as we left off, if you remember, with Jesus at the graveside of Lazarus. And we left off verse 37, where some who were gathered there were saying, could not this person, this Jesus who opened the eyes of the blind man, could not this person have kept this man from dying, referring to Lazarus? Of course, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days already, and he's been there, and Jesus delayed 2 days in getting there, so it's kind of cool. Hi, Susan. I see you've logged on since I stopped greeting before, so good to see you too. Hope everyone's well and your family also. So then we pick up with verse 38 today, and verse 38 says, then Jesus, again greatly disturbed. We have this phrase, greatly disturbed, means almost angered in a way. He's so disturbed. Greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Okay. In verse 39, Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days. And if you have heard me at all preach on this or in other situations, you know that I love the King James version of this, which says simply, Martha says to Jesus, referring to Lazarus, he stinketh. He stinketh. Which is a great way to put it, I think. But so what's happening here? Well, the details of this particular sign are not given directly, but the actual details in some ways are not terribly important. But the statement that's made by Martha is significant because it tells us that there is no doubt that Lazarus was actually dead. There's decomposition taking place here, according to Martha. So she makes this statement, and that statement is not there just as an offhand comment. It's made so that the readers fully understand that Lazarus, this is not a mistake, he actually is dead, and decomposition of the body has already taken place. And as I said, he's been dead and in the tomb now for 4 days. So Martha makes this wonderful statement, already there is a stench because he has been dead for 4 days. So that sort of magnifies the miracle, doesn't it? Makes it even more profound that Jesus is able to raise this man from the dead. That's the story behind this, the power of the story behind it, I should say. So then continuing there in verse 40, Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? You would see the glory of God. And so for John, for the evangelist, this is the reason for this miracle. We call it a miracle. John calls it a sign, right? This sign is for this purpose. It's to reveal the glory of God, and that Martha would see the glory of God through this sign. So this is kind of reminiscent of the words that Jesus sent to the messengers who originally told him that Lazarus was sick. This is going to take place, not only Lazarus' death, but also his being raised. This is taking place so that the glory of God can be linked with the glorification of the Son. And that's the purpose of this. And Jesus again makes this clear in verse 40. And then continuing in 41, so they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe you sent me. So Jesus is offering a prayer here, which is kind of neat. And he is praying out loud, apparently. He's praying, he's using these words, and he's speaking this not for his own sake, but for the sake of those around him. It's for the benefit of the bystanders nearby, so that they might believe that God has actually sent this Jesus for this purpose. So the prayer is said here not so much for Jesus' sake, but for those who are there who can hear it. And I'm always interested, Jesus always looks upward when he prays, doesn't it? And that little note is in here. They took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you. And then he continues that prayer. So kind of an interesting thing there. And then in verse 43, continuing, when he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Unbind him and let him go. So Again, the purpose of this this loud tone that Jesus takes when it says with a loud voice, he said, "Lazarus, come out." Purpose of this is probably to make sure that everyone hears it, so that the crowd knows that that it's Jesus, and through the power and the glory of God, this is taking place. That's what the story wants to convey, I think, by saying Jesus said this with a loud voice. Okay, very similar to the prayer that we just read. It's for the benefit of the bystanders that this is happening. Now, Bible scholars are funny folks sometimes, and they do a lot of thinking about things. And one thing that they have been thinking about for generations is they wonder how Lazarus got out of the tomb if he was still bound together in his grave clothes. If you can picture this, is he kind of waddling out? I mean, what's going on here? The gospel writer, the evangelist, doesn't tell us that detail. Probably it's not all that important anyway, but these are things to think about. He was still bound, so how did he come out, right? How did he physically make his way out? His body is brought back to life in a sense. That's the claim that's being made here. By the power of God, his body is being brought back to life. So that being the case, still being bound in grave clothes probably is not a big deal, is one way to look at it. He could have certainly come out of the tomb by that same power that raised him from the dead. And maybe that's a simplistic explanation, but, well, it's the best we can come up with. But it's an interesting thing to think about. And then there's more practical scholars who have said, well, maybe it was just his legs were bound separately, which wouldn't then be as difficult for him to move around once he was raised. But there's just no evidence in here that says anything like that. And we always got to go by what the scripture says and what the evidence points to. So that's all conjecture, fun things to talk about in some ways when it comes to Bible study, but nothing of terrible importance. And more importantly, that's not important to the evangelist. That's not important to the author of the fourth gospel. This is simply, as I said, to reveal the glory and the power of God. And remember, later, when Jesus is raised on that first Easter, where are the grave clothes in that story? If you look at chapter 20, verses 6 through 7, they stay in the tomb, don't they? And they are neatly folded up, carefully folded up, as if someone took the time to carefully fold them and place them in the corner. So you see Jesus, and that might suggest, scholars think this too, that the message here is that Jesus, unlike Lazarus, would never be in need of grave clothes again. See, Lazarus would go on and die. He would die again. But the implication is not Jesus. So there may be something to this grave clothes thing as well that's important. So he says, Jesus again says to him, says to the disciples, unbind him, you let him go. Okay. Then continuing, verse 45, many of the Jews, therefore, remember we see that word Jews, it's Jewish leadership. This is not anti-Semitic, the entire Jewish people. That's not what's being referred to here. It's the Jewish leadership. That specific Greek word eudoi means Jewish leadership, the religious leaders of the day. So many of the Jews, therefore, had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, and they believed in him. They believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what he had done. So the response to this miracle is kind of mixed. We're told that many who were present there, many of the Jewish leadership, actually went on to believe in Jesus, kind of like Nicodemus eventually will do. But others went to the Pharisees and reported what took place. And so they did that because they were being hostile to Jesus, I'm sure. And that precipitated, of course, the gathering of the chief priests and the Pharisees to think, well, we got to do something about this guy Jesus, because look at what's happening. Look at what he's doing. And this is what happens next in verse 47. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, what are we to do? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation. Okay, so they're afraid, you see, of a popular uprising taking place, because if people start to believe in Jesus as the Messiah, they're going to believe in him as a certain type of Messiah that is going to free the Jewish nation from the grips of Rome. And so the chief priests, those gathered, the Pharisees, they were nervous about this. They didn't want this to happen. All right. So they call this meeting, probably an informal gathering rather than the official Sanhedrin meeting. And they gather, and it's just this council, you might say, this sort of a sidebar, maybe you can even think of it that way. And they gathered together, and this person Caiaphas happens to be the high priest. When you were appointed a high priest, you were a high priest for a long period of time. So what's being said here really is that he was the high priest during this and very important thing that's going to take place. Okay, so that's what's being referred to here. This event, this Jesus event. And so they say, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation. As I just said, that's a real concern. But it's what they're afraid of. That's what they're fearing, that this is what will happen. They'll get caught up in the frenzy of these messianic expectations, and the Romans won't be able to just stand by idly and let that happen. Okay. Verse 49, but one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, as I just mentioned, said to them, you know nothing at all. Do you not understand that it is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed? He did not say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but to gather into one the dispersed children of God. So from that day on, they planned to put him to death. So this is the event that sets the wheels in motion that leads towards the crucifixion. Okay? And again, this reference to Caiaphas being the high priest that year maybe says that the author and possibly the readers are not terribly familiar with the customs, since the high priest, as I said, was appointed for a long time, appointed for life actually. And it sounds like this is a yearly term of office, so maybe they're not terribly familiar with that. But it's more the sense, I think, in the original Greek, it's more the sense of it was during that time, during this time of Jesus, this faithful time, that Caiaphas happened to be serving as high priest. So it's probably more what we're talking about here. All right. And Caiaphas, without knowing it, becomes a prophet, doesn't he? And it's again, the evangelist is making a little side note here to the readers that he didn't say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was about to die for the nation. So he's kind of a reluctant prophet in some ways, or an unconscious prophet. He doesn't even realize that he's being prophetic here. And he's right, isn't he? Jesus would die, but not in place of the political nation of Israel, but on behalf of the people of God. And Jesus would save them not from physical destruction, as Caiaphas is referring to, but from eternal destruction. Okay, hearkening back to John 3:16. And Caiaphas could not have possibly imagined that what he was saying here was any sort of deeper prophecy than just saving the nation of Israel. And so that's his true motive here for having Jesus killed. Okay, moving on then to verse 54. And we're almost done with this section. Jesus therefore no longer walked about openly among the Jews, but went from there to a town called Ephraim in the region near the wilderness, and he remained there with the disciples. So Jesus kind of gets out of Dodge for a little bit, gets some relief, probably about 12 to 15 miles away from Jerusalem, is what scholars think, and he spent some time there with his disciples. Now, the Passover of the Jews was near, verse 55. The Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. So this is Jesus' final Passover, the final one of his ministry. And now we're just before the beginning of the week leading up to the cross, what we now call Holy Week. This is just before this is taking place. Okay, but it's just prior to the festival itself. And Jerusalem would have been crowded already with many pilgrims from all surrounding districts coming to purify themselves ceremonially, I should say, before the actual festival starts. Okay, they were looking for Jesus. Those who were gathered, they were looking for Jesus and were asking one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? Surely he will not come to the festival, will he?" Which is kind of their way of saying he's not that stupid, is he? That he's going to come to the festival now? That the chief priests and the Pharisees are trying to get him arrested and have him killed? He wouldn't possibly show up now, would he? So that's kind of the force of that statement. Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who knew where Jesus was should let them know, so that they might arrest him. And chapter 11 ends with that note. So now the order is given from the religious authorities that if you know where Jesus is, you must report his whereabouts so that they can find Jesus and they can arrest him. And we know what happens from there on in. So that ends this famous story of the raising of Lazarus. And then we're going to move on next time to chapter 12, which is a story I'm very familiar with. It's the anointing tradition. And we referred to this a little bit before. We talked about the feeding miracle and how these miracles and these signs are all tied together in some way, and comparing them with Mark's gospel and John's gospel and the subtle differences and what might be going on there. But we can talk more about that the next time we meet. So I hope you all have a great day today. It is Monday, as I said. It is May 11th. Happens to be my youngest son's 22nd birthday, so I'm going to be meeting up with him and celebrating his birthday a little bit today. So it's hard to believe he's 22, but he is. So time marches on, I suppose, right? So everyone, have a great day today. Stay safe, okay? And just have a blessed day, and stay connected with people. It's so important that we do that. So we will talk to you soon. Take care.